It's my pleasure to introduce Mitul Desai. He is co-founder of the Care Hack. And Mitul, you are a very impressive individual. Your experience spans working in product development and data services to healthcare, finance, and law. You served on the Obama administration and are currently a board member of NAMI, a mental health organization that we at ShareWell really, really respect. And now you've turned your focus on to the Care Hack. And so I'd love for you to kick things off by sharing a bit of your journey. When and how did you become a caregiver?
Yeah, thank you, Amy, for that introduction, and thank you to ShareWell for this opportunity, and thank you all for showing up. I love the audience, and yes, please, any questions you have, that's what we're here for. So, thank you for that question. My journey and my parents' journey as caregivers started many years ago when my brother was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which, as you probably know, and the audience probably knows, is a pretty disabling and serious disease. And so, we knew it would be bad. And so there was a whole range of emotions from sadness and, grief. We knew we were kind of losing the person that we knew and loved because he was being transformed by this illness. Some anger too, denial. I certainly was in a little bit of denial, like, how can this happen to my family type thing. Um, and so there's a swirl of emotions, and it was all kind of exacerbated by an actual extreme sense of isolation. It sometimes felt like we were the only family dealing with this. You felt just so alone, and that's for a number of reasons. Back then, there weren't organizations like ShareWell, and we weren't really aware of NAMI. And so, that isolation. Again, isolation stems from stigma a lot of times, and back then, stigma towards these really serious mental illnesses was even greater back then. And so, what happens is, there's no one for you to really talk about this issue with, and then over time, you internalize that stigma and you stop talking about it yourself, right? Which, as we know, is the exact wrong thing to do when you have difficult, complex emotions going on. You got to process it, you got to talk about it. And the way I describe the sort of stigma and the loneliness is like when someone in your family is diagnosed with cancer or has a heart attack, you are greeted with flowers and Hallmark cards. When someone in your family is diagnosed with schizophrenia, you're greeted with silence. And so that was our reality. And I would say, we really had no idea actually what lay ahead, even though we were sort of had all these difficult negative emotions. We didn't realize how bad it was going to get. And so in some ways we were pretty clueless back then. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Mitul. I feel like I wanted to put my hand on my heart a lot, and I saw the audience members nodding their head. So thank you for sharing your story. Can you recall a pivotal moment in your journey of caring for your brother that shifted your approach to caregiving?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I really love that question. There were so many moments, as you can imagine. And for a long time, I tried to forget them, but now they're just like fuel for my passion to, help fix the problem. So I remember them all, and I remember them all vividly. I would say one in particular, I think that your audience may find interesting. So this is, again, many years ago. This is my brother had just been diagnosed. He was living for a few years with schizophrenia, and as happens with a lot of mental health diagnoses, not just serious ones, even depression and anxiety, there's a lot of experimentation trying to figure out which medication works, which psychiatrist or therapist you click with. And so we were deep in that experimentation mode, and not a lot of things were working, frankly. And so I got a call one day from my parents. I was up in Boston going to law school, and they said, "Hey, we're going to come up to Boston. We found there's this world-class psychiatric research institute, and they have this treatment intervention for schizophrenia, and it looks pretty promising." And I thought, wow, that's great. I mean, Ivy League institution, like, they're experts. They must know what they're doing, right? So we were all pretty hopeful. And you can guess maybe how the story ends, but it didn't really move the needle. at all. And so, in addition to obviously the financial costs, a lot of this stuff is out of pocket. Again, I'm sure your audience knows that, like, there's this thing called mental parity, lack of parity. So insurance covers physical health at a higher rate than it covers mental health. And so oftentimes families are having to write checks out of their pocket to cover this stuff. But in addition to the financial costs, I think the cost that was the hardest to bear was the dashed hopes, right? Because we were kind of hopeful that this expert facility would change things. And for me, that was a moment where I really kind of realized that no one was coming to save us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the system didn't have the solution, and there was no silver bullet, and it was really going to just be us. We really, truly were alone. And I had thought up until that point that it was just a matter of we just had to do more research, and no, there was some medication out there that would work, or there was some expert out there. And you kind of, this moment was really kind of a light bulb moment for me that, again, it was just going to be up to us to solve the problem. And so I filed that away in my brain. I still had to graduate law school and, build my professional career. And I sort of said, you know what, when I have time and when I'm ready, I'm going to come back to this and come back to it in a really meaningful and deep way. And so that was obviously a difficult situation, but the silver lining was it was probably the catalyst that prompted me to start thinking about how I might play a role in this.
Yeah, thank you, Mitul. And let's touch now on the care hack, because you mentioned, the system wasn't going to save us. We had to do it ourselves, right? And you've been proactive, and now you're working on something that's helped you and other caregivers. And so I'm curious, can you share a little bit about what the care hack does?
Yeah, thank you. So, I often call not just serious mental illness, but caregiving for serious mental illness the biggest healthcare problem you've never heard of. It's, family caregivers in particular are essential parts of the healthcare system. The healthcare system actually couldn't function without family caregivers, like, full stop. But yet the irony is they get no support from the system. And so, I had known that from my personal experience. And as I started to dig into it and do research and talk to other families, and then, my co-founder is a psychiatrist, community psychiatrist, started talking to him. We eventually did a survey of 1,000 caregivers to really understand what the problems were. And the problems were many, right? Like, again, you're basically having to do everything from be an insurance claims expert to a medication expert to a care navigator to being a legal and financial manager. I mean, it's like you're doing everything. But the three top needs that kept coming up from the survey and from the customer discovery were the need for training and education that's easy and actionable, easy to access. The need for community, because it's so isolating, which is why what ShareWell is doing is so important. And then the need for real-time problem solving. And so that was what informed our decision. And, the evidence for supporting caregivers is so clear. There's a very clear business case that if you support the families of individuals with a chronic mental illness, outcomes improve and healthcare costs go down. And so the evidence was there. We knew what they wanted. And so, again, it's like they tell all entrepreneurs is to create the solution you wish you had. And so that's what I'm doing with the Care Hack and my team. And so it's definitely sort of a mission-driven objective, but we see a massive market, right? It's a huge unmet need.
Yes, it definitely is a big market. And I'm curious, in your experience, what are some common misconceptions or stigmas around caregiving that might be the barrier from caregivers getting the support that they need?
Again, I'm loving your question. So, one is ironically, there's if you talk about not just mental illness, but also things like dementia and Alzheimer's, basically cognitive disabilities as opposed to physical disabilities, there's over 25 million Americans who are caring for someone with a chronic cognitive disability. And so we've come up with this term cognitive caregiver. And so that's who we focus on. So, but not everyone, no, people, these 24 million folks are acting like caregivers, but not all of them self-identify as caregivers. Maybe it's partly the name. I wish if I was a marketing person, I'd come up with a different name, but it is what it is. And so when you don't self-identify as a caregiver, you're kind of closing yourself off from resources that are designed to help caregivers, like the Care Hack and like others. It also, I think when you don't embrace that identity, you are closing yourself off from maybe the confidence and the sort of sense of empowerment that comes from embracing that role and that job, because it is a job. So I think that's one. People, not enough folks self-identify as that role, even though they're actually doing all the tasks. The other one, which is probably more problematic and in some ways insidious, is that caregiving by far too many is still viewed as like a private family affair, best handled like in private by families. And when it's a private affair, that means you just do it on your own. Like, it's not anyone else's job, it's the family's job. And what that ignores is that, again, this is actually a job, right? Some cognitive caregivers are actually spending upwards of 30 hours a week doing all the different tasks. And like any job, it requires training and education and support. And the reason to do that is, yes, it helps the family and their loved one, but it also, as I said earlier, it improves healthcare outcomes and reduce costs. Guess who likes that? Insurance plans and hospital systems. It improves the productivity of the caregiver because they're not taking so much time away from work to do this job. And when they're properly supported, it improves their productivity at work. Guess who likes that? Any employer. And so the ripple effects of treating it like a job and supporting them like they are workers, there's positive ripple effects across the healthcare system, across businesses and employers and society at large. And so I think if we could dismantle that stigma in particular of treating it not like a private family affair, but actually a job, that would be a huge breakthrough.
Yes, agree. And I love your point about identifying as a caregiver and really sinking into the empowerment of that and that identity. I'm curious, and we can write in the chat, who all identifies as a caregiver in this talk today. You can, or you can raise your hand too, or write in chat. Actually, let's have you write in chat so we can all, you can do a thumbs up or high five, just say yes. And maybe some of you are a little bit timid to maybe identify yourselves as a caregiver, but now we've just heard the importance of really leaning into that. Yeah, I'm seeing thumbs. Keep them coming in. Don't be shy. Yeah, thank you for that, Mitul. And I'm curious, so do you have any specific tools or resources the Care Hack offers that you would like to share with our audience? Of clearly we have quite a few self-identified caregivers. Anything that you think would be helpful for them?
Yeah, and by the way, thank you all for acknowledging your role as caregivers. It's so important that we all self-identify and publicly and proudly self-identify. So kudos to you all for doing that. I love that. Yeah, so we, again, informed by our findings from our surveys and talking to all these families, we identify those three needs, right? And so I think the one thing that I'd love to highlight today is our real-time problem solving that caregivers can get through human coaches that we have. So they're supported by our own proprietary AI, which I'll talk a little bit about, which I also think is really interesting, really excited about. And so our coaches are licensed clinical social workers. They have 5 to 10 years experience in these exact topics. So they're very knowledgeable about the topic, but we also screen for empathetic coaches. Because again, as anyone who's been through this knows, that's equally important, the content and the way the content is delivered. And all these coaches are supported by an AI that we've developed that's proprietary exclusively for caregivers. And two ways in which it's different from ChatGPT and all these other things, which I love and I use all the time, except for caregiving, is that our AI does not produce false answers. ChatGPT still 3 to 4% of its answers are not correct, and you can't afford to have an incorrect answer when you're caring for someone. And our answers are short and actionable. A lot of times in these other AI, chats, you'll get really long kind of encyclopedic responses. And so our coaches are able to rely on this AI in the background to relieve the cognitive burden so they can handle more people. And also it allows them to spend more of their brain power on the things that actually require human thinking and intervention. And so that, for the caregiver, again, means real-time, customized support and problem solving. And I should say, the Care Hack, we're excited about it for so many reasons. We think it's going to transform the lives of these 24 million Americans. We're also excited because it's complementary to the other organizations that are out there, including whether it's ShareWell or nonprofits like NAMI. You mentioned NAMI. NAMI has this incredible family-to-family class, which is an 8-week course designed exclusively for families who have someone with a mental illness in their family. It's an 8-week course. It's a great place to start. Our stuff layers on top of that and provides more. There's also the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving, shorthand known as RCI. And, Rosalind Carter was a trailblazer in her own right, not just in mental health, but in caregiving. And they do incredibly innovative work around policy and advocacy and working with employers. And again, the Care Hack is complementary to all these folks. And, the more people working on solutions, the better. As you all know, this problem is huge. And so we're really excited to be able to know these other organizations and collaborate and partner with them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really do believe your solution is so complementary. I mean, even to peer support, we do have caregiver support groups on ShareWell, and there are some limits to that, right? Like you offering customized coaching, and specific for the situation that someone is caring for right now. That's really incredible. So I encourage all of you caregivers to check out the Care Hack. I know many of you attend our peer support groups, but if you're needing some more help, this is the way to do it. Yeah, thanks, Mitul.
Yeah, and you can go to thecarehack.com, and actually our app is coming out in a few weeks, which are like super pumped about. So you can get on the wait list for the app and be one of the first people to receive it. So yeah.
Yeah, and we had someone write in the chat about double tapping on the empathy. That's incredible that should be number one. So thank you for sharing that.
One thing just on that point quickly, Amy, is because we are so focused again on not just the content, but the empathy and building trust with families. So much of their trust has been broken by the healthcare system. We want to start from a place of trust. And so even the AI, that's where it's in the background right now and supporting the coaches. Eventually, when it becomes something that caregivers can directly interact with, we will only allow that when we're confident the AI itself is also empathetic. Yeah. So that's how important it is for us, building this trust and coming from this place of empathy.
Yeah, Mitul, you have a really big vision. And I hope all of us on this call recognize that it is going to revolutionize caretaking for so many people. And I'm curious, what do you see as the future of caretaking? Or what would you like to see our future?
Yeah, oh man, I think about that all the time. One of we have two goals at the Care Hack. Our most primary and our most urgent goal is to help caregivers move from like a reactive kind of crisis to crisis position to a more forward-leaning, proactive posture. But we also have another goal, which is to help do whatever we can, including by partnering with organizations, to help change the way mental health care is delivered by placing caregivers more at the center of care, right? If you just think about, in really simplistic terms, a therapist or a psychiatrist sees someone with a mental illness at best twice a month, maybe once a week, right? That's still only 4 times a month. the family sees that person, especially if they're living with them, uh, hundreds of times, and it has hundreds of interactions a month. And so the data points and the information and the understanding and the sort of holistic view that the families have, that is incredibly valuable information that can only help providers. And so if we can recognize them as actual partners in care delivery and not keep them at the margins, as sometimes happens, that benefits everyone. And so that's my dream, is to reorient mental health care where caregivers are more at the center of care and seen as partners.
I love that. I love that. And Mitchell, now I want to get personal before we launch into our Q&A. The caregiving journey is a challenging one, and I'm curious, how do you, when times are really hard, like how do you personally keep going? How did you do it in the past? How do you remain hopeful and a positive attitude amidst everything going on? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Amy. It's, being honest, I wasn't so great at this when I was younger. It would be overwhelming. I would try and suppress the emotions, and then it would inevitably come out sort of unpredictably and in bad ways. So through a lot of hard lessons, I've learned to pay more attention to my mental health and my energy, right? So I used to think it was about time management. It's really about energy management, especially when you're working on complex problems like this. And so paying attention to what are my energy sources, what are my energy drains, and trying to limit the energy drains, spend more time with the energy sources. It does help actually that I'm working on something, I've found a problem I'm in love with. And so that sustains you and keeps you going. My parents also do a ton of work on the caregiving side. My dad actually does, the majority of it, and has over many years. He's retired now and has even more time. And so I'm lucky to have that. I'm also lucky to have a team at the Care Hack that we're all aligned in our values and our mission and our passion for this. And so it's really about, I guess, to summarize, paying attention to what your triggers and your sources are of energy, and then surrounding yourself with people who support that, right? It's simple, maybe not always easy to execute in the real world, but that's kind of where I've arrived at after a lot of learning and trial by error.
Yeah, thank you, Mitul. I have one more question before we launch into the Q&A. But for those of you who want to speak with Mitul, why don't you type your question into the chat now, and then we'll call on you soon. Yeah, definitely take this opportunity to pull some of the wisdom from his years of caretaking. Mitul, how long have you said that you've been officially kind of caretaking for your brother, or when was he diagnosed?
He was diagnosed over 2 decades ago.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it's been a while.
Okay. Yeah. Lot of wisdom, a lot of experience there. So with that said, I'm curious, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting their caregiving journey? Maybe it's with a friend, or yes, a family member who's been just diagnosed, or even a colleague that they're working with, that they're trying to support them and they're just starting out. They don't know anything about the caregiving realm.
Again, really great question. So the first thing I would say is, I wouldn't sugarcoat it, right? It's going to be a tough journey. And so be prepared for that. But the good news is you're not alone. And, these are things I didn't know, all those years ago when my brother was diagnosed. You're not alone. There's millions of other families who are dealing with the same issue, and you can get access to them through organizations like ShareWell, through ours, through NAMI, through other organizations. So you're not alone. I would also say do the research and get the education and the information so you can act like an advocate, like a confident advocate. And don't be afraid to push the system, providers, therapists, whoever you're engaging with the healthcare system, push them to think, what else can we do? Should we try a new medication? Should we try a new facility? Should we try a new supportive housing location? Do that respectfully, obviously, but from a place of information and confidence, because again, you have a lot more information than the providers do. So turn yourself into an advocate. The other thing I would say is don't forget to take care of yourself. This is obviously, talked about all the time, self-care, and this notion of an airplane, where they tell you to do with the oxygen mask, put it on yourself first. It's said so many times, I feel like it becomes almost generic, but it's really important, right? There's this notion of survivor's guilt, where if you have a loved one who is still alive, but is in a place with an illness where they can't really enjoy life in the way that you can, you feel guilty and you feel like it's indulgent to enjoy life because your loved one can't. So who are you to enjoy life and take care of yourself? But that's actually the exact opposite of the attitude you should have. You should realize this is a marathon, not a sprint. And by taking care of yourself, you actually are a more effective caregiver. And so those are just some of the things I would say. Yeah.
Mitul, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. And this was a really, really powerful talk. And I hope that you all check out the Care Hack and get some more resources and support for yourself. You deserve it. You deserve to be supported too.
Take care. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.